welcome everyone in another episode of our Conversation of Change series. Today we have with us Riya Saxena. Riya is the senior associate with the RMI India team. Her work focuses on catalyzing climate finance to meet India's 2070 net zero target. Prior to RMI India, Riya worked with the UNDP on sustainable finance policy advocacy and design of SDG-aligned financial instruments. As a member of the UNDP Secretariat to the Ministry of Finance Task Force on Sustainable Finance, she led discussions with regulators and industry members on sustainable disclosures and creation of a roadmap and taxonomy of sustainable activities for India. Previously, she worked with an impact investment platform, Asha Impact, to invest in for-profit early-stage social enterprises. Prior to this, she worked in London as a consultant to Charities Aid Foundation and Acumen Fund. Welcome, Riya.
Hi, thank you.
All right, Riya, with that, let's jump into this really interesting discussion. Riya, my first question to you would be about your academic journey at LSE with a focus on development management, economics, and international development. And it has been a significant part of your life. Can you first share how this academic background influenced your passion for sustainable finance?
Sure, no, happy to do that. And thank you for having me here today. So my journey in the space of, I would say, development economics, some version of it started very young. I remember, like any other graduate or any other class 10 student, the vision was, oh, I want to be an IS officer. It started with that vision. And when I was in college, I took a bunch of internships that helped me figure out and hence led me to my route to my academic journey for my master's. So my first internship, interestingly, was with Citibank. I was interning with Citibank to understand their mortgage portfolio, how the recession had impacted it. And that was, the prize kind of internship for any economics students. I was doing my undergrad in economics from Hansraj College. And, at that time it was like, oh, wow, you're working with Citibank as your first internship. Sounds really fancy and great. And I really enjoyed, I would say, the research that I did. But after a point, I felt that that kind of research was good, but it was too disconnected from the ground. And that's where I felt large disconnect, especially for myself. And that's when in the next year of my internship, I decided to jump to the complete extreme end from this to work with an IS officer in Kaithal, Haryana. He had pioneered this really innovative model of doing night camps where he would go into each of the schools in the district, be willing to sleep there for the night. And because the district's sub was coming to a particular area, all amenities, all kind of cleanups in that district were done. And they used to do like an award ceremony for the number of folks who had done something good in that district. They would get all electricity, water connections, etc. through. So it was really a very interesting model that I was able to see of change that was driven by this individual, the individual IS officer who really influenced me to work more closely with the ground. And I think that experience also made me realize that how working in the space of, I would say, government or policy is fantastic. But I was also able to see some of the ups and downs that you have to go through internally, being directly in policy, the pushes and pulls that you would face being on the complete inside of it. Of course, there's a lot of power influence that you can use for the good, but there's also a journey behind it. And I was like, I would ideally want to see something at the intersection of what I saw as the efficiency of the private sector with the scale and impact that the public sector can bring. And then that led me to my next internship, which was with JSW as a part of their CSR department. And that's the year CSR was sort of just the first year of CSR rule coming in. A lot of companies were exploring, what does this mean? How do we really look at it? And in my mind, that internship gave me a real sort of mixture of the two worlds I was looking for, because with CSR, we had that capital And there was very strong intention from the top at JSW to do real social good projects. So we were working to see how can we do upskilling at industrial training institutes for students. And that experience showed me that you can do scale by partnering with government. But adopting the work ethic from the private sector or development sector is fairly critical. So that led me to my decision to do my master's in development management at LSE. I did that right out of undergrad, and I'd say it was these internship experiences that helped me navigate that path, really well and see what's best suited to me. I didn't waste time sitting down for placements. I remember at that time in college, and I was just focused on getting applications. And specifically, this course at LSE really, struck a personal chord with me because a huge part of this course at LSE was about doing an actual consulting project, which was a part of our program. And that meant that whatever I'm learning or studying at LSE is not just going to be theoretical. I'll get to really experience some of it live and implement some of the knowledge that I have. So that actually worked out really well, I would say, and got me excited to study the subject and go deeper into this space.
No, I mean, that's really good to know, Riya, and thank you for sharing your journey from your internships to moving to your educational journey, and how this is really influenced your passion for sustainable finance. And I think it's evident that your academic foundation played a very vital role in shaping your career path, which is a really nice thing to hear. And with that, I have a follow-up question actually. Could you also delve into your professional journey from UNDP to RMI? Specifically, what were some of the challenges you faced and successfully addressed while promoting sustainable finance practices on a global scale during this transition?
Yeah. No, thanks for that question. So I joined UNDP right after my first role at Asha Impact. The intention really while joining UNDP was, with the value and the name that the UN holds, it allows for a lot of easier access to government doors. It really gives, the trust in the UN is something that the government of India understands well and gives you an opportunity to really engage more deeply on systematic issues that you might not be able to do so otherwise. So being a close partner for the government was something that the UN offered. And that's when I joined the institution. In terms of, the work that we did at the UN, and what was most interesting. So this was, I would say, the pandemic year. Majority of the work that we were doing, and as a part of the task force that you mentioned, we were convening 150 experts on different topics around sustainable finance. So one of the biggest thing, at least in the pandemic year, was how do we really get inputs from people? The format of engagements, running these kind of large processes for inputs, etc., was all ideally envisaged in person. And we switched to the online model because, of course, there was no other option. And that worked out very beautifully, I would say, because people were able to give a lot more time than they would be able to in person. So that was one sort of, key thing that was there. But more substantively, in terms of, the content or some of the work that we were doing, I think with our role or with my role at the UNDP, what was most interesting and exciting to me was, for instance, working with a municipality to help them understand what could be some innovative financial products that they could install or adopt in their municipality to raise financing for SDGs. What could be some of the changes that they could think through? So what could green bonds, for instance, or SDG-aligned bonds mean at a municipality or at a state level? And that journey of learning what to suggest to municipalities was very interesting. I think often the challenge over there was, and this is not so much of a challenge, but maybe more of a constraint, is that the government works in a certain fashion, right? There are certain protocols, rules, processes to be followed, which are fairly right because you need to do that to ensure transparency and trust in the government systems. But at times, these processes can take way long. Building consensus within government is not always a straightforward line. Getting buy-in from the top is extremely, extremely critical. And even at times, if you may have that buy-in from the top, things may still not move on the ground. So those were, some of the realities that I was able to see when we engage with, different state governments or different senior officers. And I think one strategy that we adopted to overcome some of this was really trying to build alignment and buy-in right from the start. It was never that as UNDP, we never worked as, hey, this is our solution and you should adopt it. That was never an approach that we took. It was always about, we're here to support you in designing the solutions that are best for you. And being treating your different partners as true partners right from the start of the journey is super critical in building buy-in across multiple levels. So that's something that I learned from UNDP, which I've now taken in my new role. So you asked about the transition to RMI as well. Maybe briefly, I can touch upon it, is that with RMI, a lot of, RMI is a think tank focused on clean energy transition and supporting different aspects of that in India. And it's a global organization that has expertise in, specific sectors such as the power sector, e-mobility sector, hard to abate industries and technologies that are within the sector, like green hydrogen, green steel, ammonia, etc., and also the green building space. So it's anything and everything around the energy transition journey. And these four sectors are where we focus most of our work in India. So for me, joining RMI was a very, I would say, exciting move, because I was keen to bring some of the knowledge that I have around development finance, how government views financing, how different philanthropies and investors view, looking at supporting the social sector, using that knowledge to help advance some of our sector-specific work that we're already doing fantastically with state governments. And it was also an opportunity for me to learn from my colleagues about some of these very specific, sector transitions that are happening and technologies that are there. So I'm not a sector technology expert, if you say. I have fantastic team members who I can just quickly, have a good conversation with, get the sector experience and expertise, and follow it up with financing knowledge to really try and advance some of our work. So it really felt like a strong match in terms of what I could offer and what I could learn from the organization.
I mean, it's really inspiring to hear. Also, I think your work involves working with a lot of stakeholders as well, and I'm sure it's not a small feat. And I think your insights into green finance are equally enlightening for us. And with that, I wanted to ask you, in your current role at RMI India, can you explain the strategies you're using to connect sustainable practices with Indian financial institutions? And any innovative methods or partnerships that you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, that's a good, difficult question you asked me. I think in terms of, some of the specifics that are there around what can be done to support Indian financial institutions around climate finance or sustainable finance, I think one of the biggest levers of change that's coming in, especially if I talk, for instance, about the banking sector, is from the Reserve Bank of India. RBI has started a lot of discussion and conversation and asking banks to measure how climate risk is going to impact the banks. And on the other end, what are the new emerging investment opportunities that are coming around the climate horizon space? So, the obvious ones, of course, are utility scale solar, doing rooftop solar as areas of investment. But EV is also, again, another hot favorite for now, has really picked up pace and momentum. And beyond that, there are a number of emerging sectors, where you can see that they're maybe not completely ready just as yet, but will be ready in the near future for investment. So be it like specific things such as zero emission trucks or green hydrogen related investments, or very specific investments in some materials that are classified green, for buildings. Those kind of things are certainly on the horizon. And I think, in terms of, what are some of the sustainable practices here, I would say a lot of financial institutions have realized that the business environment is changing. There's one, of course, the regulatory environment is changing, but the business environment, the economics of different businesses will change, if it has not already done so. And solar, for instance, is an example where economics are, tilting more in the favor of solar compared to coal. Similarly, in EVs for specific segments, two-wheeler, three-wheeler, and specific use cases, such as commercial use case for like a Zomato, Swiggy kind of use cases where you need a lot of running around throughout the day. That's where you're starting to see economics for electric vehicles make sense. And I think the biggest practice that I would say that can help in leading to more finance flows from these kind of large institutions is by seeing a shift in the business case. Of course, having a strong moral case for why you should go green is there, but that does not do enough to move the needle and get people to act. So really showing a difference in terms of business case, highlighting new investment opportunities, how it would make sense to go down that path is, I think, a practice that that we're trying to adopt. And there are multiple ways that this can translate into action, such as capacity building sessions, knowledge building sessions, for instance, working with financial institutions to help them devise their plans towards net zero targets, because that's also a new area for them. So a lot of support and capacity building are things that can be done. Yeah, I think those are some of my thoughts on this.
No, thank you so much for sharing such candid thoughts and strategies around integrating these practices into the financial institutions as well. And with that, I would just like to also know for our larger audience as well, could you explain what is green finance and why is it crucial for sustainable development?
No, thank you. So green finance, I would say, is just trying to invest money in opportunities that are accepted and known as green, or sustainable in that lens. Finance is just money. It's just you're adding the use case of that finance with regards to green. So for instance, any investment that you're doing for solar projects, for EV projects, charging infrastructure projects for EVs, any kind of renewable energy projects, any projects, for instance, around biogas, developing hydrogen as a source rather than coal, for instance. I mean, any activity which is leading to lesser carbon emissions, and eliminating carbon, financing those kind of activities is broadly termed as green finance. So you can have either equity investors who take a stake in startups, grow these startups to a mature company stage. They have a stake in it in terms of their owners of a particular company. So it can be in the form of equity, or it can be in the form of debt, where banks and NBFCs, or non-banking financial institutions, they're giving loans for projects that are green. So broadly, I would say finance constitutes of debt and equity instruments. Green is basically the end use, which is that you have activities that are accepted and qualified as green. And I would say from a government standpoint, so the Securities Exchange Board of India, SEBI, they have put out a framework on what should be called a green bond. And that's like a good, I would say, starting document to see and understand what are activities that are universally accepted as green. Of course, there are multiple activities which can be debated whether this is green or not. How green is this activity? Is it actually leading to reduction in emissions or not? There are a lot of the grays in between as well. But some areas are very clearly marked as green activities. So financing those is broadly green finance.
Oh, thank you so much, Ria. I think there's a lot of jargon around this, and it's really helpful to know from you. I'm sure it will also be helpful for our audience. Um, and with that, you recently joined Small Industries Development Bank of India in the unveiling of the EV Safety Handbook alongside female electric auto drivers in Delhi, highlighting the intersection of climate action and women's empowerment. Could you elaborate on how initiatives like this, which promote female participation in sustainable transportation, contribute to both climate goals and women's economic empowerment?
Yeah, no, thank you for highlighting that. I think so SIDBI is doing, in fact, a fantastic work of promoting electric vehicles in the country, and they're doing that not just from a lens of doing green focused development, but also including social elements that could often get ignored, which is why they did a specific event around women drivers driving e-auto rickshaws in Delhi NCR. So they did a session to train them, take them, for instance, to a OEM who develops the e-rickshaws, go and see these e-rickshaws as a driver, empower them that if you have a breakdown in your auto, how can you really repair it, etc. So what I think is most interesting is that as you're transitioning, from traditional jobs and roles to new opportunities because of the risks that are there from the climate and the new climate opportunities that are opening up, there's also a role to reimagine how specific jobs that were traditionally, say, earmarked for men can now be looked at by women. So if I talk about the e-mobility case, there is people can argue that because there are lesser components in an electric vehicle compared to an ICE, which is a petrol or diesel driven vehicle, the repair and maintenance is a relatively lesser onerous job, and also one where if you're in the industry of building electric vehicles, it's a highly skilled and technical job. So seeing more women in subjects of sciences that they can take on more roles in the design and development of electric vehicles, seeing more women being able to drive and manage electric vehicles is also another one because they're easier to maintain, easier to repair relatively. Over time with more charging, they can be, for instance, like you can charge a scooter at your home. You don't need to go to a petrol pump, which might be in a far off remote area where you might feel or fear your safety, right? So there are certain aspects or dynamics, for instance, around these sectors that are opening up new opportunities to engage more women, for instance. So that makes a big uh, difference. And I think, as we see the changing environment, the global sort of changes that you're seeing, say wildfires or floods, for instance, in India, more closer to home, all the flooding that's happened in North India, etc. A lot of times research has indicated that women are the first ones in the household to lose their economic status. They'd be the first ones to become or go back just to the role of being caregivers, while men will start looking out for jobs, if the family is hit by a disaster or by a natural calamity. So in these kind of instances, what I mean to say is that the development that we see and the kind of changes that we want to see, if we can start imagining active participation for women and create that space right as we are in this journey of transition, that would be fantastic because often they will be the first responders to crisis and lose out on their livelihood or income because of the climate crisis.
No, I think that's totally true. I think women do bear the brunt of climate change largely, and hence the examples like these EV safety handbook are very inspiring, and they also highlight the intersection of climate action and women's empowerment. And it is evident that initiatives like these would also have a very significant impact on both fronts. Thank you so much, Ria. And with that, could you also share with us a recent project that you were particularly excited about, one that impacts one that demonstrates the impact of your work in the field of climate finance?
I think I would say two examples come to mind. One certainly has been the work on and this is my work with UNDP in my former role on the Task Force on Sustainable Finance. I think um, that was one project where we were engaging not just with Ministry Finance, but 10 other different line ministries, Niti Aayog, MOFCC, the Pension Fund Regulator, Insurance Fund Regulator, a bunch of others, when really the intention was how can we create, consensus around what would a roadmap or architecture for sustainable finance look like for the Indian economy. I think, just the process of consulting so many experts, pulling some of that content together, pulling the recommendations for the government, uh, being a participant of understanding how does the government really work and think about some of these issues, what are the considerations they need to keep in mind, which we may forget as a non-government sector, right? So that I think was a really powerful, enlightening journey. And, some of the recent sort of efforts that are being led by Reserve Bank of India or by Securities Exchange Board of India, they're fantastic in terms of setting the broad architecture for the country for green finance and enabling that. So it's really good to see some of the conversation being taken forward in different shapes and forms by different government entities, and they really driving the agenda. And I think another one that I'm still actively engaged on is with the World Bank in SIDBI. They're designing a $250 million facility for EV financing of 2 and 3 wheelers. As RMI, we've been a knowledge partner to them to help think through some of the nuances of the design of this facility, what financial product would be valuable for the ecosystem, and also thinking through what could be some de-risking measures for electric 2 and 3 wheelers. So some of that work, I would say, or thinking has already, SIDBI is fantastic at implementation. So they've already implemented it through some of their pilots. The broader EV risk sharing facility, we're waiting, for that to get officially launched. And I think that also would have a significant impact in terms of mobilizing more finance for EV 2 and 3 wheelers.
Thank you so much, Riya. Your journey is truly remarkable. And with that, I would like to come to the concluding question of the day. What tips would you give to individuals who are aiming to create a significant difference in the field of sustainable finance and development based on your own experience and journey?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. I'm often asked that question about how do you really, like, if you're not someone who's in this field, but you want to get in, what could be helpful? My sense is, one, try and understand all the different roles that are there around sustainable finance. So you can be on an investor kind of a role, where you're, for instance, working with an impact investment fund or any of the other funds, and you want to look at investing in startups. That takes a very different skill set of doing financial analysis, business model due diligence, etc., and honing your skills around that is a very different journey. I would say another different type of role in this space could be, for instance, with consulting firms, actually helping specific, say, startups or large clients or large philanthropies come up with whatever support that they want around setting their climate focused strategies, helping some implementation of it. So you could explore joining, for instance, a consulting, and then the skill that you need to train. How do you problem solve? How do you break it down into granular bits and hence try and problem solve through there? Again, a very different skill to develop. On the other end, you have institutions which are more research focused, so think tanks, right? These institutions, you really get a chance to go into depth of understanding a few sectors, but doing more research, which is not just academic in nature, but also fairly practical and action-oriented kind of research in today's day and age. So that's a different role where you say maybe develop skills around, specific sector expertise you develop. Again, that's different from consulting, because as a consultant, you'd be exposed to multiple areas, maybe don't get the depth to go very deeply into one. With a think tank, you can get that opportunity to become, for instance, like a e-mobility expert or a green hydrogen expert, and that could be the journey you path ahead. And I think, another sort of space of engagement, I would say, for instance, with entities such as, industry associations or industry bodies that are working closely to build consensus around green finance and sustainable finance, or blended finance for that matter. So working with these kind of industry associations where maybe your role is more focused on implementation, getting different perspectives in, being a liaison, and really trying to bridge that gap amongst members, share knowledge, so those kind of roles require different skill sets. I would say that working in the climate finance or broadly the sustainability sector has a multitude of roles. So take some time, one, to map out this landscape, figure out the top organizations of each. Number two, really try and dwell deeper into the skill set that is required. And I always say this, which is, I think, my concluding point, that, always think about what can you offer to a particular firm rather than just what you want to learn from there. Because a lot of times institutions are small, they have very limited staff. So they always prefer to have someone who can, right from the start, offer something in return for learning that they will achieve. And that makes you a strong candidate as well. Even if you're a newcomer right out of college, if you've studied a particular subject, or if you've studied, for instance, a specific sector, you can always say that, I've done my master's or my thesis, or I've, tried to focus on understanding specifics in this sector, and that is something I can bring to the organization. So my suggestion is that at no point in life will you just be on a one-way track. You have to make it a two-way track. So think of the value that you can add depending on the nuances of the institutions and the types of roles you want to take up. Happy to pause there.
No, thank you so much, Riya, for sharing such invaluable insights. And I personally like your advice on how one should, first map the landscape out, and also think about what we as an individual could offer the organization. Thanks for sharing that, and I'm confident that your insights will inspire many to embark on a career in this rapidly growing field and climate sector at large. And with that, I would just like to conclude and thank you once again for being a part of this episode.
Thank you so much.